Hello, and welcome to Money Talks, the Slate Money podcast where we talk to fascinating people about fascinating things. I'm Felix Salmon of Axios, and joining us from London is the one and only Lionel Barber. Lionel, welcome.
Nice to see you, Felix.
Lionel, introduce yourself. Who are you?
I am the author of the first Western biography of Masayoshi Son of Japan, one of the world's most consequential investors, and I was, for 14 years, the editor of the Financial Times. And I am currently the co-host of Media Confidential, the weekly podcast, the other co-host being Alan Rusbridger, the longtime editor of The Guardian.
We are not going to talk about media on this show. This is a 100% Masa show. We are going to talk about Masayoshi Son, the Korean rather than Japanese, but also Japanese billionaire, investor, entrepreneur, risk taker in the title of your book, Gambling Man. We're going to talk about his bets, his personality, his upbringing, and how he has fared and where he stands today. It's all coming up on Money Talks.
If you love iPhone, you'll love Apple Card. It comes with the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, you can earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, which can automatically earn interest when you open a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app, subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com.
We've talked a bit about Masa on this podcast, but as you say, he is an incredibly important individual. We can never have too much insight into him, and you know him better than most people. You talk to him, like 4 times for this book?
4 sit-down interviews, went to Tokyo 6 times. He blew me off twice, saying he was too busy. But, after being editor of the FT, you need to learn a little bit of humility. And also, he's like stalking a tiger.
Okay, so let's just start at the end, because I want to get back to the beginning in the middle. But let's start at the end, because where we are now with Masa is where exactly? In the grand scheme of his ups and downs, would you say he's up or down right now?
He's definitely coming back up quite quickly. I would say this is the 4th or 5th big comeback in Masa's lifetime. He's 67 now. He lost 97% of his wealth in the dot-com crash, almost got wiped out in the global financial crisis, almost got wiped out in the credit bubble. And now he's making his big bets on artificial intelligence. And Felix, I didn't plan it, but this week he put in $500 million into OpenAI. Sam Altman's $6.5 billion or so fundraising round. Well, Masa's a seat at the table. 3 years ago, he was nowhere.
Masayoshi Son is famously the person who, more than anyone else, loves to invest in companies at valuations that everyone else would think are completely insane. And he pushes companies to lose lots of money and grow very quickly. He is probably arguably even more than Adam Neumann, he was the guy who was responsible for the craziness that was WeWork. It seems only natural that if you have a company that's raising money at $150 billion valuation and is losing multiple billions of dollars every year, that Masa will be one of the investors in that. The only surprising thing is that he's only putting in 10% of the money and that there's lots of other people willing to go along with it.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on the WeWork story, because I think Adam Neumann bears a pretty sizable responsibility for the insane growth projections and for trying to pretend that the company was worth $47 billion at one. But it's true that Masa and Adam Neumann egged each other on. One of investors described it as feeding a monkey alcohol, which I think sums it up. Now, with OpenAI, this is slightly different. I mean, there's a lot of serious people around this table here that have got more money in, Thrive Capital. Microsoft obviously has been an early booster. And Masa's stake, I'm sure, in fact, I know he wanted to put more in. So he's having to make do with only 500 million. And second point, he's been talking about AI, artificial general intelligence, superintelligence for at least 15 to 20 years. And he thinks this thing is round the corner, and he's convinced not just ChatGPT, but also general devices from autonomous vehicles to warehouse, everything. This is going to be biology. It's all going to be infused with artificial intelligence, and he wants to be there. That's what he sees as his legacy.
He's had a few different legacies over the years, but as you point out in the book, if you look at the great sort of tech moguls on the planet, nearly all of them are just associated with one company that they founded and that does something. So you've got, Bill Gates founded Microsoft, or Elon Musk with however many companies he's founded, or Steve Jobs, or Mark Zuckerberg, or Larry Ellison. It's all very easy to know, how they got rich because they founded this company and the company became very valuable. With Masa, it's a little bit different. Like, he started a dizzying number of companies. I was reading your book and I rapidly lost track of the number of ideas he had and companies he started and magazines he started and whatnot. And yet somehow none of the companies he started are the reason why he is so rich.
Yes and no. Be fair to Masa. He's two hats he's wearing. One is the investor stroke trader, and then the other is the operator. And he did create a new mobile phone company in Japan, which challenged the status quo, challenged NTT, which at one point was the most valuable company in the world, and established that brand, did a fantastic job. And he also bought Sprint in America. Somebody said when he focuses on operational things, he's really, really good. But as an investor, it's a somewhat more mixed record because it's the Jackson Pollock theory of investing, kind of spray and pray. And there's a lot of spraying around. But he is somebody, Felix, that likes to put every chip on the board. There's no square left uncovered. And he figures, well, if I've got 500 squares, one or two might come good. And of course, in the late 1990s, he hit pay dirt with Alibaba. He put in 20 million, then 80 million, and it went on to be worth 140 billion on paper. And remember, Goldman in the early 2000s, they actually sold their stake in Alibaba. And he kept his and he made an absolute fortune. He also made a big bet on Yahoo. So he's somebody who does lots and lots of different bets. I think just one other point, you're absolutely right. He is a middleman. He's the gateway between America and Asia. He's not somebody who is a big inventor of technology or someone who controls proprietary control of a technology. He is the essential guy in the middle, spotting bottlenecks and making a bunch of money on that.
So tell me, what is the value that he adds? And I think we could ask basically the same question about someone like Warren Buffett or other sort of famous investors. What is it that he does that is essential? Is he allocating capital? Is he the guy who sees the promise of Alibaba, puts in, $100 million because Alibaba needs that investment, and then Jack Ma can turn it into billions? Is that the reason why Masa is so important and necessary in this kind of crazy tech world we're in?
Again, he has several incarnations, Felix. I mean, one is he is a kind of venture capitalist guy in a country Japan, that doesn't really have much venture capital. So he's the one, and he's constantly been talking, my phrase, make Japan great again. I mean, because it was the number one economic power in the early 80s. And Mas has been the constant person who's putting money at risk. He's prepared to take the risk. Remember, he built SoftBank from a software distribution business. I mean, it's a total startup with him and a couple of employees. Now employs tens of thousands of people and is worth, almost $100 billion. So that's the first thing. But the second point is he is very good. And I've talked to a lot of people about this around the world, Sunil Bharti-Mittal, the telecoms billionaire in India, Bobby Kotick, Activision, Jerry Yang at Yahoo. And they all say he's very good product at the application of technology. So, for example, he was very influential in pushing the B2B model at Alibaba. He said that's where the value is going to be. We can't be just doing B2C. He's very good at that. The problem is he gets this terrible record when he starts trading. We talked about WeWork and ridiculous valuations, but then he sets up his own in-house hedge fund, North Star, during the credit bubble, and bingo, $8 billion or so, $6 to $8 billion goes up in smoke.
We'll take a quick break and be back in a second.
If you love iPhone, you'll love Apple Card. It comes with the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, you can earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, which can automatically earn interest when you open a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Apply for Apple Card in the Wallet app, subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Apple Card and Savings by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with AutoQuote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
We should talk about North Star because this is one of the bits of the book where you're really sort of making news.
Yeah. Isn't that good? I love
That's
it.
great. It's always good when a journalist commits journalism. We appreciate that around these butts.
Yeah, I'm a reporter at heart. You know that. Never mind this editor stuff.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about North Star. North Star was basically, as you say, an in-house hedge fund where he takes a bunch of public companies and makes big leveraged bets on the stock price going up. He's just a speculator at this point. He has no control of the companies. He can't use any of his operational nous here. He's just looking at number go up. And he's making such big bets that he gets nicknamed, before people even know that it's him, that he gets nicknamed the NASDAQ whale because there's this one buyer in the market and no one knows who it is, who's just buying these things up, and anyone who tries to take the other side of that trade is just getting steamrolled. Yeah, tell me, you spoke to him about all of this. What was he thinking? What was the idea?
Just take a step back. It's 2020. Musk has had terrible publicity with WeWork. His SoftBank Vision Fund that we haven't talked about, that he's raised $45 billion from the Saudis, $15 billion from the Emiratis. It's almost $100 billion venture fund. That's not making money. A lot of companies underwater. He's tried to do a second Vision Fund. And then we have COVID. So this guy is almost wiped out. But central banks come in, stock prices start to recover, and he wants to go back to the tables. By the way, that's why I call it gambling man. I mean, several serious people say he's a gambler. He just can't stop wanting to go to the tables. And at this point, he says, I need to kind of restore my reputation as an investor. And by the way, I'm going to just go for the big tech stocks, the Apples, the Googles, the Meta. And I'm going to make $25 billion a shot bets, and not just on equities, but on derivatives, options trading. Now he recruits an ex-Deutsche Bank trader called Akshay Naheta, and together they go in the market, just as you described, and they steamroller everybody. Felix, in the first few weeks, they make $6 billion. But then Akshay, he's saying, no more, there'll be a counter wave. People are going to be alert to this buyer. They're going to hedge on the other side. The stocks are going to go down. Masa takes no notice. And boy, do they get steam. They lose billions. And I think this is about an attempt to recover reputation. It's also an insane gambling streak. But then, Felix, I broke some news because guess what? There's an internal whistleblower who's saying Masa shouldn't be doing this. He's co-investing alongside SoftBank. This is a total conflict of interest. And internally, SoftBank goes into panic mode and they try and find out who the whistleblower is. They bring in law firms and everything else. I think I do know who the whistleblower is, but I don't want to get a libel suit, and I don't want you to be sued either, Felix. But this is an extraordinary episode towards the end of the book.
It is kind of wild that, like, in the grand scheme of things, going long mega cap tech stocks in the wake of the pandemic is one of the greatest and easiest ways to make an insane amount of money that the world has ever seen. Like, they all just skyrocketed over the next couple of years, and yet Masa somehow contrived to do it in such a risky way that he lost money.
Yes, and he was warned by one of his top henchmen, this financial magician, as I call him, called Rajiv Misra, an ex-Deutsche Bank credit trader, by the way, somebody who made himself tens of millions of dollars during the global financial crisis because he was leading that big short team that Michael Lewis describes. Misra is the guy that Masa hires as the head of the SoftBank Vision Fund. And in 2020, Misra says to Masa, and I quote him in the book, look, I think you can make money, but when people find out there's going to be so much noise, you can't stand the noise. You can't keep this up, so stop it.
Let's talk a little bit about the roots of all this. This is a biography. You go back all the way back to Masa's grandparents. One of the sort of stylized facts, I guess you could say, about the tech moguls in America, whether you're looking at Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Elon Musk or even Larry Ellison, is that they grew up in a sort of comfortable upper middle class kind of way. And there's been a lot of talk about how they were privileged enough to be able to take a bunch of risks and know that they would be fine because they have that, comfortable upper middle class background to fall back on. Masa is interestingly different. His family, when he started becoming an entrepreneur, was actually quite rich, but in a very different way.
Yeah, I tracked the childhood because I don't think you'll mind saying this. When I talked to a few people about how to approach the book, Mike Moritz, who was long time top of at Sequoia, said to me, don't focus so much on all the noise around the Vision Fund and the scandals and whatever in the last 10 years. A lot of that's public. Go for the formative years. And in that respect, I also figured myself that we needed to understand motivation. Why is it that he takes such insane risks? Why does he, and you alluded to this earlier, seem to be overpaying all the time? And I think it goes back to the fact that he is an outsider. He is Korean by origin. Second generation, his grandparents came over at the turn of the century. And Koreans are second-class citizens in Japan. I mean, Masa, for his first 20 years or more, was living with two names, one Korean, one Japanese. And the Japanese name was an alias. So they were pretending to be Japanese, but they were actually Korean. And Koreans they can't be teachers. He wanted to be a teacher. They're outsiders. So what they do is they go into the underground economy. And his father, who left school at 14, was first of all a bootlegger in the shanty town where they grew up. Then, as you said, he started making some money pig breeding, then loan sharking, and then, crucially, he gets into pachinko. That's the slot machine gambling. And this is definitely in the shady side. I mean, do they pay taxes? Is organized crime involved? And Masa watches his father. I think he learns the art of the hustle, but he doesn't want to go there. He wants to do something different. He wants to go legit. And crucially, he goes to America. And here's the bit of privilege, because by this time, his father is quite well off. He goes to a top university, gets into Berkeley, and he sees the technology dream, etc. And I think then he goes back to Japan. But guess what? Because he's Korean, he can't get a bank loan. But he pushes through that, through mentors, etc. So this is the difference between the guys that you describe, all of whom, by the way, Masa knows. He's close friends with Larry Ellison, Bill Gates, who I interviewed. All these characters. He was close with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs gave him the exclusive distribution of the iPhone 20 years later, 30 years later. So he's sort of come from nowhere, come from nothing, but pushed through.
He seems to have an astonishing, and this goes back to his teens, an astonishing ability to persuade absolutely anyone of absolutely anything. Here he is just like this kid, and he's getting these multi-million-dollar loans. He's persuading older men to put their own homes up as collateral. Then later on, obviously, he seems to quite famously have a Steve Jobs style reality distortion field where if you meet him, you just come away going, oh yeah, absolutely. He persuades the Saudis to give him $45 billion, as you said. You've spent a lot of time with him. Did you feel that kind of personal magnetism, whatever it is that Steve Jobs famously had?
I did, because he is a great salesman. And what is the art of being a great salesman? Well, the first is that you kind of exude that confidence that you are right and you've seen the future. And if you're on the other end of that trade, or you're the guy that he wants to buy the company off, you kind of go, well, he's paying this amount. And also, maybe it's FOMO, it's fear of missing out. I'm sure that's the case with the Saudi crown prince. Masa gave him this view. I can introduce you to the ecosystem and technology in America. And by the way, I'm the guy that did Alibaba, so I will do great things for you. And lastly, this was somebody at SoftBank Vision Fund, when I asked him about the same question, Felix, that you asked me. This guy said, look, it's like Ronald Reagan in Star Wars. All the experts tell Masa that it can't be done. It can't happen. They told Reagan it can't be done. But Reagan believed it. And because he believed it, he just said it's true. And that's like Masa. He has this incredible conviction and incredible drive to be number one.
Star Wars, you're right. Eventually, it took much longer than anyone imagined. But it kind of became a reality. And if we look today at the way that, Iran is shooting missiles at Israel and they're all getting shot down, bing, bing, bing. That's basically what Reagan was talking about back in the day. I guess my question for you is, if you look back at Masa's career, what is the thing that he believed was possible that no one else believed was possible and then became a reality?
Well, first of all, on the internet, yes, he was trading crazily. He was trying to build, and he's constantly talking about empire, like he's the Napoleon. He's got a Napoleon complex, by the way, not just because he's small. So he was trading stocks, but he understood the enduring impact that the internet was going to have on our society. And therefore, even though he was wiped out almost completely at the end of the dot-com bubble, he stayed with it. He understood. He had a long-term view. And he's taking that same view on AI. He was talking about the singularity, this moment when robots become more intelligent than human beings. He'd been talking about it for 20 years. And his view is, well, at some point, I'm going to be right. So I think that's what makes him rather different. And you also referred to the fact that you say he overpays. And when I first started looking at some of these properties, I agree. Why is he paying $800 million for the trade fair in Las Vegas called Comdex He's bought off Shelley Adelson, the great Republican donor and friend of Trump's, the Las Vegas casino magnate. I mean, Sheldon Adelson, who's the toughest guy in the West, he couldn't believe that Masa was paying $800 million. But Masa looked at it and said, the fact that I'm running this trade fair and I'm going to be networked to the gills with all these tech billionaires, that's worth it. So he's looking at it in a slightly different way from you and me.
We'll be right back after this.
This episode is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve recently announced a big rate cut, and there could be more rate cuts this year and in 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest you earn on your cash. So, if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade bonds, check out Public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up, and once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments even as rates decline. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/Slate Money. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA and SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed. Not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cashback earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit-card.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
So let's go back to this idea of legacy. Masa wants, right now he's just concentrating on AI and he's like, this is going to be my legacy. But obviously it's not on some level. Sam Altman has already eclipsed any role that Masa's going to play in this. What do you think Masa's legacy is going to be? Like, for me, I think you've already talked a little bit about he's the guy who brought entrepreneurial risk-taking to Japan. And that he turned Japan into a country that could take those kind of risks in a way that it never could before.
I think he modernized Japan. I mean, he went with the deregulation after the credit bubble burst. I mean, remember the real estate bubble in Japan? That was what killed the hopes of Japan becoming number one. I mean, there was the most unbelievable crash, and it didn't last 3 years. The banking system was totally crippled. But Masa, through this, stuck with technology, invested in America, and then came back and built literally the mobile internet and challenged the incumbents, NTT and KDDI. So there's a serious operating telecoms type legacy in Japan. The second is the risk factor that you say. I mean, he hasn't made risk-taking totally acceptable in Japan, but he certainly helped, foster the venture spirit. I think, and I'm going to stick my neck out here and wait for the executioner's axe. I think that, look, he's got stakes in 500 companies in this Vision Fund and elsewhere. I think some of these companies could come good. I'm not saying it's going to be an Alibaba type success, but if you think that he bought ARM Holdings, the advanced semiconductor chip designer in Britain in 2016, spent $32 billion. On paper, it's now worth more than $100 billion. And if ARM can do some serious deal, this could be a much, much bigger company. So I think I'm going to put a bit of money on a reasonable comeback act, part 5.
I guess my last question is, Masa's, as you say, he's Korean rather than Japanese. He's always been an outsider. He's massively successful. He's the number one Japanese business person that anyone in the rest of the world can name. I don't even think there is a number 2, really.
Maybe Tadashi Yanai of Uniqlo.
What is his status in Japan? How do Japanese people think of him?
Object of suspicion in the establishment. Masa doesn't make anything. He's not a steel maker. Doesn't make cars. It's too much financial engineering. Don't understand where he gets his money, how he makes money. Or he's a big disruptive force, and he's Korean. So that's a big rap sheet. And it's amazing the degree of prejudice against him. On the other hand, amongst retail investors, if they'd had the stomach to stay with the stock of the big ups and downs, they would have done reasonably well. I don't know, something like double-digit, 10, 11% over the last 10 years. So he's sort of seen as something different, a necessary part of the financial capitalist system in Japan, a necessary disruptive force, and also a bit of a cult figure. I mean, he's a very private man, so he tends to walk around the streets with his collar turned up with dark glasses. But he plays the clown. He's just different in Japan. So very much part of the tapestry, but in the establishment, definitely an object of suspicion.
You talk a bit about retail investors or just investors. I mean, obviously, SoftBank is a public company. You can buy the stock of SoftBank, and many people do. There are investors in the Vision Fund, mostly sovereign wealth funds. But we know that Masa has done well. You talk at great length in your book about how he has made personal investments alongside and sometimes in conflict with SoftBank. How have the investors in Masa's vehicles generally fared compared to Masa himself?
Well, in the bond market, they've done okay because SoftBank, which was one of the top 10 borrowers in the world at one point, and, regularly has, I don't know, well over 100 billion in debt. It's been up there with Toyota at one point and Volkswagen. They do pay back on time, if not earlier. And by the way, the spreads are higher. They have a premium they pay banks good fees because of the debt. So in that sense, I would say, well, now amongst institutional investors, I think opinion is divided. Some people don't understand how the company, the SoftBank Group, which is the investing group, as opposed to SoftBank Corporation, which is the operational group covering the telecom businesses and the internet, that people feel it's opaque. They're not sure, there's a conglomerate discount. In other words, the value of the assets alone are worth much more than the actual stock price. The stock price does not reflect the value of the assets split apart. So that's a problem. On the other hand, I met a number of institutional investors who are actually pretty happy with Masa and think that they've done okay, but they didn't invest in the Vision Fund.
Have you talked to any investors in the Vision Fund? How are they feeling?
Well, it was pretty bad in 2020, 2021. I think the Saudis were feeling bruised. They didn't like all the bad publicity about WeWork, but they were made whole, and that's important. Masa has treated his LPs pretty well. He was a bit cavalier at the beginning. I mean, who wouldn't be if you've just been given $100 billion or $60 billion to spend? They did not like the publicity, but I think, as I understand it, at least, relations are much better now between the LPs. But obviously, the Saudis and the UAE did not reinvest in the second Vision Fund. They only went in the first one.
Yeah, I think once you put in 45 billion, you're like, well, that's enough for the time being, probably.
Yeah, exactly, Felix.
Lionel, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been awesome. The book is out now in the UK and it's coming out in the US soon?
It's coming out in January, Felix. Simon & Schuster, One Signal is the print.
We will pre-order it, or else we will just hop on the plane to London and check out the Monet show and pick up a copy there.
There's some good art as well as good books to read, Felix.
There's good art. Yeah, go check out Monet. There's a Michael Craig Martin show at the Royal Academy. I need to get over to London and check this stuff out. Lionel Barber, thank you very, very much for coming on Money Talks. Thanks also to Jared Downing and Cheyna Roth for producing. And we'll be back on Saturday with another regular Slate Money.
I said to Roger, the last thing you are fair and balanced. That should have been my slogan.
When the Fox News Channel first went on the air, it promised to change television.
Few broadcasts take any chances these days, and most are very politically correct. Well, we're going to be different.
It's going to be kick-ass, and I want to be part of it.
I'm Josh Levine. In this season of Slow Burn, we'll look at the moment in the early 2000s when Fox News became a political and cultural force.
I'm okay with wearing an American flag. And if you're not, I think you need to examine who you are.
You'll hear from Fox insiders, many who've never spoken out before.
I was not told about that beforehand, for good reason. I wouldn't have gone along with it.
And you'll hear from the activists and comedians who tried to stop it.
He said, "You're being sued by Fox." I went, "Really? That's fabulous."
Slow Burn Season 10, The Rise of Fox News. Hear the entire season now, wherever you listen.